Today I'm going to show you the tools and process I use for creating high precision bronze shims for my folders. There are as many different ways to make a knife as there are makers making knives. Some makers prefer to work more simply. Others like a more complex approach. The thing I try to showcase in each of my knives is exemplary workmanship. Quick reminder, if you appreciate the tips, tricks, and instruction I'm providing in these videos, please subscribe. Subscribing tells YouTube that people appreciate the content and helps make it more accessible among the millions of videos on YouTube. Okay, so punching and lapping my own bronze washers, or more accurately, shims, came out of my quest for more accurate tolerances. By blueprinting each part on my knives, I can achieve accuracy tolerances of less than 1/1000th of an inch. All right, so we're just going to jump into this. There's no reason for this to be a very long video. I'm just going to start out by covering the tools and materials that I use, and then I'll show you how I punch, and I'll show you how I lap and measure. So starting out, let's start out with the actual punch set. This is a Precision brand True Punch. I believe that I got this, I believe I got it from McMaster-Carr, but I think they're available on eBay also. They're not cheap. I believe it was a couple $100, and it comes with a punch alignment block and several different punches in different sizes. And then these are, I don't know what they're called. These are these are little alignment pins that go into the punch so that they'll stay aligned. You punch the center hole first, and I'll show how that's done here in a few minutes. But anyway, this is you need one that's designed for metal shim stock. They make them for softer material like cork and nylon, but you need one that'll punch metal. Next thing is shim stock. This definitely came from McMaster-Carr. This is phosphor bronze shim stock. This is sold as 10 thousandths thick. It's actually 10 thousandths plus about another half a thou. So it would be 0.0105 or somewhere around there. And that gives you a little bit that you can fine tune. And it actually came, I bought this as a 6-foot roll of 6-inch wide, and then I cut it down so it fit in my toolbox. Because once you untape the roll, it's like a big, long, sprung out thing. So I just cut it into 1-foot lengths so I could drop it into the toolbox. And then, and this is a piece that I've been cutting shims off of. Just kind of shows you what it looks like. Other tools, this is a Mitutoyo micrometer. This one is pretty accurate. It goes out to 5 decimal places, and I use this for all of my precision measuring. My surface grinding, my back spacers, my shim stock. These aren't too bad. I think this was probably around $180 mark, but I could totally be wrong on that. I don't remember. I've had it for several years. But it's definitely a great investment. So I think on a tool like this, you can never go wrong buying a good quality like a Mitutoyo. And it's a high accuracy level instrument. The other thing is I sand with papers. These actually get spray glued down onto a granite surface plate. And I use the Indacia Rhino Wet Red Line. So this is 800. And 800 is the finishing level that I like. I like my shims. I don't want them too smooth because I want oil to stay in them. So I like having the fine score marks that I get with 800 grit. And I've experimented a lot. I've gone higher and lower in grit. And I find that 800 works best for accuracy, cut speed, and I like the way that it works on the knife. And then the last thing is, and I use a lot of this, I usually buy a case at a time anymore. This is Loctite General Performance 100. They sell this, 200 is firmer grip. I like the 100. I use this to hold paper onto my disc sander. I use it to hold paper on my granite surface plate. And I'll show you another trick that I do. I actually use it to glue the shims to my finger when I start lapping the shims. But this is really good stuff. It's not too expensive. And it's when you decide to remove something, it comes off easily enough with very little cleanup. All right, so the next thing is I'm going to show how I punch these out. So this is the block. The first thing I do is I punch the small hole, the centering hole, which in this case is going to be an 1/8 inch, and then I'll punch the larger hole. So we'll start out by just punching this hole. Shim stock basically slides into this slot right here, just like that. You drop the 1/8 inch pin into the 1/8 inch hole. Pretty simple. And then you just give it a good whack with a hammer. Now you don't want to knock this pin all the way through and hit, especially if you got, like, this is a metal table. I don't want to hit the pin on the table and dull it. So it doesn't take a lot, just a good sharp whack. And that thing, you can see it didn't go all the way to the bottom. I just hit it hard enough to knock the punch through the bronze shim. Okay, so there's the 1/8 inch hole knocked in there. And then what we do is come back to the punches. And in this case, we're going to do, I think, a 1/2 inch. We're going to do the 1/2 inch punch. So I'm going to take the 1/2 inch and I'm going to put this little 1/8 inch guide in there. And I'm going to take this 1/8 inch hole and I'm going to line it up in the 1/2 inch spot. And I'm going to shift it around until that 1/8 inch guide drops down in. And now I'm ready to punch this thing again. So I'm going to give it another good whack. Try not to knock it all the way to the bottom. And this works best if you have some kind of a firm backing. So that's punched. We'll shove it out through the bottom. And there's our shim. Okay. We'll just we'll set that right there. We can see it. All right, so I want to talk for a minute about my my outlook on the shims. I believe, all else being equal, that a larger bearing surface is going to give you a better center or a better centered blade. So I try to use the largest shim that I can fit in the knife. Generally, that means on my knives, I can fit a 3/8 inch shim on the lock side and a 1/2 inch shim on the off side. So, and I'm okay with that. I will put 2 different size shims on the knife to encourage better centering. Because generally what happens is the lock tends to put pressure on the blade when the blade is closed, and it wants to push it to the off side. So if you have a larger shim on the off side, that kind of helps resist that torque that's trying to push the blade over. Just something to think about. I learned that tip from Johnny Stout, so I want to give him a shout there. But I think it helps, and I've seen the difference. I've tested it and used a 3/8 inch shim on each side, and then switched out to a 1/2 inch or a 5/8 inch shim on the off side, and found that it does help. But that only helps with everything else being right. If your tolerances between your back spacer and your blade and shim stack is off, that's not going to do a whole lot to help you out. So just something to consider when you're designing your knives. Okay, so now that the shim is punched, and we're just going to punch this one and we'll work with it today. Now that it's punched, it has burrs on it and it's not to final thickness. So this is where we're going to start lapping, and we'll move over to my granite surface plate, apply some paper, and do some lapping. All right, so this is my granite surface plate. I I actually have a couple. This is the largest one I have. I think it's I think it's 18 by 24. And if you're a machinist out there, you probably shouldn't watch this because I glue sandpaper to this thing all day long. I know that that means that I'm creating micro pits and stuff in the surface of this. And I don't care. I bought it for gluing sandpaper to it. And I can glue I can easily put 4 sheets of different grit paper on this thing and work through grits pretty easily. The key to using this, and right before I started the camera, I had to clean this up, is don't leave your paper on too long. That glue that I showed you, it's great and it releases well within a couple weeks. But I had a piece of paper on this thing that had been on it for a few months, and yeah, it didn't come off real easy. So that took a little elbow work. And but it's nice and clean now. I've got all the adhesive and all the residue off of it. It's nice and smooth. And next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead. I'm gonna spray the back of that 800 grit that I showed you, and I'm gonna glue it down. All right. So in this case, since I've only got the one sheet, I'm just gonna line up the edge and press it down. So I've got my shim here, there, and the next thing I do is I have found it's really hard to hold these shims just with finger pressure because the shim wants to stick to the paper. So what I've started doing is I glue the shim to my finger. So I'm going to take some of this glue and I'm just going to spray some on the back of this piece of paper, and I'm going to dip my finger in it. Just like that. And then I'm going to press my finger down on the shim. Okay. And the shim is now mostly glued to my finger. Okay. Then lapping is pretty straightforward. So starting out, the first thing I'm doing is I'm just removing burrs from the punching process. So I'll start running this in a figure-8 pattern. Obviously, I try not to sand my finger off. I try to keep just the shim on the paper. And I check it and I look at the pattern. So right now I'm getting a little more pressure on the front than I am on the back. So I'm going to readjust it slightly, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it also about 90 degrees, and we'll run it again. Okay, and once I get going, I can add a little bit more pressure, which helps to keep it really flat. All right. Still off a little bit on that edge. And I don't know if you can see that, but there's a dark spot right here on the edge. So I'll turn it another 90 degrees. I'll run it again. It could be there's a little bend in the shim. All right, so that shim is looking pretty good all the way around. So the next thing I'm going to do is, before I take any measurements, I know this side is nice and flat, it doesn't have any burrs. The other side I know does have burrs still. So I'm going to clean off the side that I just did. And there's a little bit of acetone on that rag that I just wiped it off with. I'm going to give myself a little bit more glue. And I'm going to glue the side I just lapped to my finger, just like that. I got a little residual glue on the shim on this side from my finger. It's not a big deal. The sandpaper will take it off. I'm going to press this down, and we're ready to go. So I started out very light. This side had the heavy burrs from the punching process, so I'm going very light. If you put too much pressure, it'll grab on the paper and it'll just take the shim off your finger. So start out with real light pressure. And then as it starts to work those burrs off, You can push down a little bit firmer. All right. And that side's looking pretty clean. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clean it up. A little bit more acetone here. Clean my finger and clean the shim. I don't want any of that glue to get measured when I take a measurement on the thickness of the shim. All right, so that's pretty clean. And now I'm going to take a measurement. So if you never worked a micrometer, this is kind of the way to hold it. Pinky in the inside the anvil, and your thumb and index finger running the gauge down. And there's no way you'll see the measurement, so I'll just take the measurements and tell you. All right, 0090, 90 degrees, 0091, 90 degrees, 0091, 90 degrees, 00905. All right, that is pretty dang accurate. So I can go with that. That'll work. And that's really all there is to lapping these shims by hand. I hope this video inspires you to push the limits of precision on your knives. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments section below. I do try to answer all questions. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay safe out there. I'm Bob, and this is Ranger Made Knives. Out.